Hello, welcome to Nyambung, a program to get you clicked and connect. I'm here with my co-host Nadila Amani. Good morning,
Halo
Nadila.
Budina. Good
Hello.
morning Budina.
So, what are we going to discuss today?
Okay Budina. We cannot start your first episode of podcast of course. Congratulations anyway. It's
Hi,
your
thank you.
first episode of your podcast.
Thanks to you.
Thanks to you. Of course, we cannot start the podcast without stating the elephant in the room. Of course, right? About what is actually happening in Palestine and Israel. It has been a talk of the town of the world. Even if I could recap on what has been happening in the last 2 weeks is, according to Al Jazeera, of course, 11 days of relentless Israeli bombing to the Gaza Strip and thousands of rockets has been launched back into Israel by Hamas. Building that housed multiple international media were being leveled to the ground by Israel air raids. Because of that, at least 248 Palestinians, including 66 children, were killed. In Israel's side, 12 people were killed, including 2 children. And the last time I know, it's supposed to be a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, but just hours after that agreement for ceasefire, we saw Israel attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque. So, can you walk us through about what is actually happening between the two states, Budina? Because it's like
Now, you mentioned just
what?
earlier, right? This is not necessarily between states, it's between Israel and Hamas. And you know what Hamas is, right? Hamas is just one faction of political groupings inside of Palestine that has been fighting very fiercely against Israel. So it's very interesting that people has been capturing it as Israel versus Hamas strikes rather than Israel versus Palestinians. So what's interesting to note here is that the past 11 days is one of the most deadliest and most destructive strikes that Israel has done so far. But one thing that we have to note, this kind of occasions happened, on very frequent basis. Almost every few years, you will hear about strikes and tensions between Israel and Palestine. So every one thing to notice is that every few years there will always be some kind of tension between Israel and Palestine. Usually, the scale of the destruction is not as staggering as today, because what we just recently witnessed is that Gaza Strip is not only bombarded in the housing sites or compounds where they say the Hamas activists and guerrilla fighters are living, but they also strike buildings where they know for sure that's also the headquarters of some news agencies. So Israel is willing to destroy the entire building rather than going and chase the Hamas directly. So this narrative that Israel has been using, that Hamas is using human shield, is getting out of what do you call it, out of proportion. It's really getting to the point where it doesn't make sense at all.
Okay, about the yesterday ceasefire, Budina, about that, there has been an agreement between Hamas and Israel to have a ceasefire after the 11 days of unrest, bombing, and attacks. But the last time I checked, of course, Israel is still attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque. So, what do you think? What will be happening between Hamas and Israel?
After this,
Yeah, after the attacks.
the thing about conflicts that has been happening for multiple years, even decades, is that one shot of ceasefire often is not enough. The thing is, have we handled the source of the problem? Which, in my view, this is a problem of existentialism of Israel versus Palestine. Israel is not in any position, there's no sign from within Israel for them to relinquish power, territory, uh, not even influence in the region. Um, I guess the latest update about Israel-Palestine was about the status of Jerusalem as the capital city, right? If yeah, and the status of the two state, whether Israel is ever going to recognize that there is the Palestine state. So these two are very central. And the thing is, Israel is saying and showing signs that it is not interested in having Palestine as a state and get recognized for it. And Jerusalem is to be fully taken over by Israel. So it's a very existential questions. Once any country take a very maximum demand on something, negotiation will be very hard to do. And the point of any ceasefire is to go to negotiation table. So having Hamas stopping the ceasefire or agreeing to stop their rocket launchings also doesn't mean much on the Palestinian side, because Hamas is not the kind of group that will be willing to go into negotiation table. It also has a maximum demand of turning Palestine into a Islamic country, so religious based country. And there's a big question how or who will negotiate with Israel if any peace talk is ever going to happen. So um, it's a very complex issue that you cannot imagine will will um, will end the ceasefire in a nice ending. Perhaps the other thing that I should also share with you, and you can ask me further about, is about this history of Middle East that's been very full with conflicts.
Okay.
So I think to many people, we often forget that Israel and Palestine is not the only story from that region.
Yeah.
The only sad story, the only story of irony from Middle East. We pay a lot of attention to Israel and Palestine, but on the other hand, we forget that there are very sad story about people in Yemen. They are also Muslim. They are treated really badly by whom?
Yeah.
By Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Whoever pay attention to that and who fight
Their own
for
neighbor.
yeah, their own neighbor. So if we look at the Middle East, we cannot separate Israel and Palestine with the reality that Arab countries are divided.
Yeah.
That Middle East is populated by Arab states, by the Jews, and by the Persian.
Okay.
But the Arab comprise of the largest, in the population and also in components of countries. We have Algeria, Bahrain, Djibouti, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Palestine, Syria, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. I mean, many Arab-based countries, Muslim-based, but they have their own take of how their government should be run and how they should relate with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Same
Yes,
thing with the same thing with the Persian, Iran, Turkey, and then the Persian is comprised of Pakistan and Afghanistan as well.
Yeah.
They also have different take on Israel
Yeah.
Palestine, and then the Jews.
Yeah.
So I guess one thing that I would like to highlight here is that Israel knows. I really think that Israel knows there is a fundamental weakness among the Arabs that easily divides them.
Yeah.
And the Israeli takes advantage of this situation.
Yeah. So lots of media stated that the Israel and Palestine conflict is a conflict between Israel and Arabs. So is Israel not Arabs?
No. But inside of Israel, there are other ethnic groups. So Israel as a state comprised of the Jews, the Arabs, and several other ethnicities, including those from Africa. So inside of Israel, you have nowadays the data shows about 20% of Arab citizens. Now these Arabs are people who happen to be inside of Israel already, and those who are not interested to come back to where they used to belong. So some of them are really wealthy, some of them are not so wealthy, but they work on regular basis and inside of Israel.
Is it like it is that have something to do with what people call Israel is doing a occupational colonialism, Budina? That's why a lot of people from around the world lived in Israel.
Ah, yes. So it's one of the strategy that Israel has been using to expand its presence in the land of promise, and what they call it, land of promise.
Yeah.
So their strategy is to develop Jewish settlements. Initially, I thought, I never imagined that Jewish settlement would be a very luxurious place. I thought Jewish settlements would be, like just temporary housing or something where the Jewish would try to live in. But in reality, if you visit there, it's a very lavish, luxurious places. It's like projects of property, real estate projects.
Yeah.
So some of the houses are, or most of the houses, if I can say, especially those located in the West Bank, are located in the hills. So the higher parts of the Israel. So of course, good-looking places, and the water is secured, and so a lot of rich people from around the world choose to live there, and they also offer, like most up-to-date design for the houses. So it's it's really like the usual picture of people trying to expand real estate business.
Yeah, and there's like this trend on social media, Budina, lately in TikTok and in Instagram, that when you open Snapchat, if you know Snapchat, Budina, it is like a social media where you can post a status of like videos on what your daily life is like. So you can post a status of like videos of whatever you're doing, and then you can see people from Israel. You can see the stories, the status they post. They're like living this lavish lifestyle. They're driving this sports car, and like wearing very expensive watches, having a brunch in beaches with their friends. And then like when you move to the people in Palestine, just like their neighbors basically, it's like people are live streaming about the bombing. So I'm very curious on what is the livelihood between what kind of livelihood the people of Israel and Palestine is actually living right now.
Okay, so if you live in the Israeli side, so
Yeah.
inside of Israel and Palestine, well, there's a map actually that everybody can access that shows that the land of Palestine continues to shrink.
Yeah.
So from 100% back in the history before the UN came in and partitioned the land into the Sinai, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, Gaza, into now the Gaza continues to shrink. Same thing with the West Bank,
Yeah.
and so and worse, I think the largest Jewish settlements is located in the West Bank area.
Yeah.
And it's just sporadic dots, across West Bank area. So nowadays, some of the cities is surrounded by walls, and Jerusalem is one of it. Really big, giant, tall walls, like just like the wall of China.
Yeah.
That thick.
Yeah, I saw that.
And in order for people from Palestine to go through to Israel side, there is a very tight security checkpoints, and there's a special line for the Israelis, special lines for the Palestinians, and you can imagine the line for the Palestinians is really inhumane, packed with
Yeah.
people. It's very hard for people to go through, even though the reality is Israelis also need the Palestinian to work in their bakery and in
Yeah.
their shops, stores and stuff like that. So for those in Israel, every now and then you can hear the sound of siren, and you know uh, that which indicates that some kind of bomb or rockets is being launched, and everybody must be aware. But if you are inside of Israel zone, it's quite safe actually. It's only those who are in the border areas nearby where the Palestinian camps are maybe at risk. But Palestinians, on the other hand, live very concerned life. They are most of their areas is overpopulated
Yeah.
because they continue have to be they are pushed back to areas,
Yeah.
so they are cramped, so many people, densely populated, not enough
Yeah.
water, not enough sanitation, and
Yeah.
I saw in West Bank areas, yeah, where the Palestinians houses are, they are they are not properly equipped with what do you call that, shelters,
Yeah.
bomb shelters.
Yeah.
Because the Israelis, all houses will be built with bomb shelters, so they are practically very equipped to
Yeah.
to receive to receive
Yeah.
bombs. Unless they are out in the streets, they're practically very safe. Once they are in the building, it's the design of the buildings are bomb proof basically. But not the same thing with the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Not the same thing with the Palestinians. So
Yeah,
it's
and
not
I heard
comparable.
that. Yeah, and I heard that UN once said that Gaza in 2020 will be inhabitable because of how cramped it is and how the facilitate of the district is not enough for the people that lives in it, right, Budina?
Yeah. Yes. It's not humane at all. So I agree with you. It's not comparable, and clearly it's not acceptable for Israel uh, to continue demonstrating the gesture of uh, intolerance towards the
Yeah.
Palestinians, and the strategy of continuing to
Yeah.
expand its presence through lands and ports and streets and everything. They try to block for the Palestinians.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to ask about the UN. Actually, the UN has has produced two resolution. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, it is the partition plan in the resolution number 181, and the one that is 194, that is as a reaction of Israel is being like this inhumane towards Palestine. But why does the UN seem so powerless towards this, Budina?
Well, it has something to do with the design of multilateralism under the UN. That's one of the story that we all have to remember. After the Second World War, basically, what countries learn not to repeat is to talk behind everybody else's back. So having diplomacy, but highly or solely on bilateral mechanism, can be quite risky for other countries, because you can never know what they've been agreeing about, what they plan to do, and sometimes what they plan to do may also be, different from what they express to other countries. So they speak behind someone's back. So with the and we the world learns about the difficulty of establishing multilateral mechanism as well, because the question is who is going to sustain it, how the mechanism will be to make the institution works, both at the power level as well as at the technical level, such as financing, staffing, and stuff like that. But the Second World War brought us to the reality that basically all countries realized that the disaster of humanity has been so unbearable after the Second World War, and not to the extent of destruction was also unbearable. Very hard to rebuild some countries, especially the European countries, right? They cannot even rebuild themselves, so they need money from the US. So at that time, the agreement was to design the UN where everybody can have a voice, but only at the General Assembly forum. And the format there will be a debate. And a debate here means that at the leadership level, they can talk about what they want to raise, internationally. Everybody will be given the same chunk of time to speak. And during the debate, sometimes because it's head of state, they can basically talk as long as they want. And that's to capture the sense of how everybody feels about the state of the world. But the one who can make a decision on action, so General Assembly is basically noting concerns and developing norms, making norms that would respond to those concerns. But the one who can make action, who can take action, is the Security Council. Security Council is the one with the mandate to follow up on any plans that some member state may initiate to do through resolution. And they can go inside of other countries, they can deploy peacekeeping force, they can deploy humanitarian assistance and things like that, and also scold some countries if they wish, if the Security Council speak. But the design of the Security Council is really hinges on the winner of the Second World War, the 5 Ps. Call it the 5 countries. So this 5 countries with the veto power is basically where the decisions of the Security Council would land. The non-permanent members may change every a few years, there will be opportunity for non-permanent members to participate. But they again the point is just to deliberate, talk, and initiate ideas. But the last decision will be at the permanent five members, whether they will agree or disagree. Now, as you can imagine, Israel-Palestine has been involving the P5 for many years. Not just the U.S. actually. If you look at the history, back in the days during the Cold War, Soviet Union was also involved, and Britain was the one who draw the lines in most
Britain
parts
is the one that have the initiation.
Yeah, that's Britain is the brain behind some of these ideas, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. is the executor maybe, and the funder and a pusher. So France is also. Don't forget how France is also has been involved also in the conflict in the Middle East, because France is also part of the ally power from Britain. So it's to take action or not against Israel is not just a decision of one country. Inside of Middle East, it's very hard to rally support from the Arab countries, from outside of from inside of the UN. It's very hard to rally total vote from the permanent members of UN Security Council. So I think that's the reality. It's not necessarily about just Israel and then some one or two countries. It's a lot of factors get in the way and make Israel stronger.
Yeah, actually, of course. My God. And if we cannot actually we cannot rely 100% on the UN, how about the OIC, Budina, the Organization of Islamic Countries? Organization of Islamic Cooperation, that is consisted of 56 countries, like Islamic countries in the world. Do you think that the OIC members will actually gather and defend Palestine as we are with Palestine, like that, Budina?
So there are several layers in how we can at least at this point, the strategy from countries like Indonesia is resistance, and voicing solidarity in terms of violation of norms for freedom of Palestinians. So it's in the one level, what Indonesia has been doing is useful, because if no other countries will speak up to voice concerns about what Israel has been up to, and the absence of relative pressure to Israel, then nobody would. Imagine if Indonesia has not been active and trying to schedule a special meeting in the General Assembly and not sending all those letters so that the members of OIC would come and join Indonesia in the General Assembly. You can imagine the world will be very silent. Maybe we just hear complaints of what Israel has been doing through the media, but that's it. At the state level, there won't be anything. On the other hand, however, we shall not rely solely on that kind of pressure. The level of complexity of the conflict is so deep and broad and difficult that making statements will only develop or offer temporary solution, will only generate temporary pressure as well for Israel, basically, to do the ceasefire. Maybe without the without the pressure from the UN, the Israel will not stop raiding Gaza. But the thing is, back again to the neighboring countries. I have a picture that I developed. We can share it also if possible. Basically, the center of conflicts in the Middle East is between the Arabs versus the Jews, and then there's the Persian. So these are the three main players inside of the region. So will when Trump, for instance, and we can interpret how these countries relate to one another over time period to understand why other countries in the region is not as responsive as Indonesia.
Yeah.
OIC countries is only gathered and organized after the Arab League falls apart.
Yeah.
Arab League was designed to make sure that there's very strong influence from the Arab countries in the Middle East, which since the Cold War, it started to fell apart. Oh, not Cold War, but the Six-Day War in 1967. Basically, Arab League, when they lose from Israel, they fell apart. This solidarity among them fell apart. For economic issues, they go on their own way, and then later on for political issues, they also go through their own way. So they don't work through Arab League, but countries like Indonesia are forcing. We have to build solidarity among the Muslim countries. So the OIC we see. So OIC is a pressure to. OIC is one pressure to ensure that solidarity among Muslim countries continues. It's a very norm-based. But again, at the end of the day, do member states work through OIC for their economic interests? No. Do they use OIC for advancing their political interests in the region? No. And the most updated example of that is the signing of the Abraham Accords, where Donald Trump from the U.S. initiated peace agreement between United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel, and it has expanded to Sudan and Morocco as well. And because of that, Egypt has been tamed as well. So, countries that, some of these countries, especially if we talk about COVID, COVID situation. If you look at UAE, for instance, United Emirates Arab, this is a small country that's been really based on oil for its development, for its economy. And what you see there is that the COVID pandemic pressure them even more because they cannot sell more oil. Same thing with like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia also affected as well. So they must diversify faster than ever. This realization has been felt before, actually, that they need to diversify their economy. But one, still try to do different things by building infrastructures and tourism sites, to attract people coming from the region. So, in developing the service economy to complement the fossil-based economy. But the COVID makes it difficult. You cannot do tourism.
Mhm.
And what you can expect now is that at least you build good relationship to develop the surface site. And the leader in that regard, one of them is Israel
Mhm.
in the world. So Israel is number one in technology for food, technology of IT, technology for tourism, and many Israelis are wealthy. So if
Mhm.
you cannot travel or attract travelers from around the world, the least you can do is at least attract the Israelis to come
Yeah.
visit some of these countries.
Mhm.
So normalization, it's not necessarily Abraham Accords is not creating peace per se. I don't quite believe it's peace as we imagine, full long term time of no tensions, no conflicts, but it's more of a normalization that at the diplomatic level would allow them to engage Israel and attract investments and eliminate the negative image that some countries have. And in return, the U.S. will give them aid.
Yeah.
So it's the situation is like that, take and give.
Yeah, and what's really interesting for me, at least, Budina, we like so I see that Israel is using like political and economic strategy to strengthen their position in the region. And what is actually and Palestinian and all of the countries that is supporting Palestine is using human rights narrative to strengthen their position. Do you think it's equal? Do you think it's it's working for the Palestine?
Um, as I said earlier, global politics cannot be reduced to solely the issue of economics or security or defense issue, because global politics is also about human beings, about the people who populate the world. So um, it's it's essential for global politics to always also consider standards of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, treatment and behavior towards other human beings and towards other nations. So that kind of standards needs to be there no matter what. It needs to be voiced loud and clear. So everybody remember all the that hostilities would lead to chains of hostilities and violence, rather than solving any kinds of concerns that any country would try to, to solve. But we have to remember as well that in order for standards of human rights, also standards of solidarity among religion or solidarity among groups, what you need to do is what you need to realize, I mean, is that they need uh, practical things that also bring benefits for their people. So you cannot just preach norms without considering that on day-to-day living, people needs options. If we don't provide options for these people who believe in justice, who believe in rights, then what do we offer as an alternative? So the good question of that you just posed is that Israel has been expanding its economic presence much more than Palestine. Of course, one can say, it's very difficult for an occupied country like Palestine to be like Israel. Okay, but the countries who used to fight for Palestine, if they are truly believing in the principle of solidarity with Palestine, they should be helpful to Palestine, making sure that Palestinian people is accepted maybe in other countries, so they can get jobs outside of Israel. They will be welcomed by other Arab countries. They got development of what do you call it, human capital by schooling and things that would help them accelerate the economic growth, for instance. But what all you see throughout the years is the pattern of giving help to Palestine just for humanitarian issue, and just when you witness violence happening to Palestine. So it's a very sporadic and very, what do you call it? Yeah, nothing systematic. And it's been the countries that's been very that's known to have solidarity for Palestine are not industrialized countries. You realize that they are not the countries with the top technology development, not having the best in economy. Whereas Israel, it's even before it is recognized by many countries in Southeast Asia, for instance, it aggressively offer products to the region. So of the ASEAN member states, for instance, of the 10 member states, only 3 countries doesn't have diplomatic relations with Israel. The rest have diplomatic relations. Those with no diplomatic relations is just Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei.
Yeah.
But behind of not signing
but
diplomatic
Budina-
relations, yeah,
Budina, it was like raised yesterday that the news broke that Indonesia actually bought military tools from Israel. Is it true?
I think we can pose that question to the Ministry of Defense.
Okay, Ministry of Defense, if you're listening to this podcast, please respond.
They're the one with the best knowledge to respond, because when it comes to weapons and security tools like that, not the broad public knows exactly where they get them. So, but true. Diplomatic relations doesn't necessarily stop one country to buy products from the countries, and not necessarily stopping as well the flow of products coming in from the third countries.
Okay.
Because some countries in the region serve as a hub, as an entry point. So we may know it as a product of that third country, where actually it's just putting label on it. The product itself comes from Israel. So, as I said, it's a very savvy country in technology, Israel. So many developed countries have worked with them, which explains, right, why they have strong financial power to support all its actions, whereas Palestine don't. So where have we been in terms of realistically, operationally supporting Palestine? And the same question around as well, actually. How can the Palestinian Authority explain how they develop their how they develop all the help that has been invested to them? It's been decades. They should be able to hold themselves accountable for why they haven't been operating as we expect. After all, the country responsible for their fate is that country. You are responsible to organize other countries, to make other countries realize and put it in the high priority of other countries' agenda, It's the state. I mean, it's the responsibility of Palestinians as well, right?
Yeah.
On the one
Yeah.
hand,
Yeah, I'm curious though, Budina. How do you see the Palestine's government has been handling their nation?
they also, well, here's the thing. After with the bombardments from Israel, they at first they can gather lots of support. They gather money. They gather supports like offices and good offices lah, basically from other countries to help support their fights. But years gone by, basically they also develop factions inside of Palestine. The moderate groups split. PLO and Fatah, they split. And when I say split, they have different ideas on who should lead and how, and how to relate with Israel. Also, they have different ideas, and so those unhappy with how they lead choose to take stronger stance, like Hamas. And of course, the rise of Hamas is not the sole story of Palestine. Across the world, there was a global rising of religious-based movements that brought the rise of religious-based political parties in many countries. So it's part of a global development. So this is what I'm saying earlier. Once you leave a conflict last for too long, there will be other factors that further complicates the conflict rather than solving it.
Yeah, no, it's so complicated because like the government itself of the Palestine is divided, right, Budina? Now it makes it complicated, and I completely agree with what you said earlier that the countries that supports Palestine needs to offer more sustainable supports. They need like sustainable political and economics help too, right, Budina?
Yes, yes. So I guess we hopefully the our listeners would take this back in their activity to reflect, that what happened recently, what we witnessed in Israel and Palestine, is just one part of the sad story of world of the world. But it's not the only one. We have to be concerned how violence continue to be treated permissively by many countries, not just the U.S. because so many debates lately just focus on how the U.S. allowed this to happen, but as I said, the players here are so many. In the Middle East, so many countries are actually responsible for using peaceful means or violent means. If they choose to be quiet on violence that has happened, that means they condone violence. And once violence is condoned, it will be replicated. And once it's replicated, it becomes very ugly. And with all the dimensions of life that continues to unravel, you can imagine how sad the impact will be for the lay people. Yeah, maybe the politicians don't quite feel it. They can hide. They can get asylum rights, protected by other countries, running away from the mess in their country. But what happens to the regular people? So this is our time, I guess, to start looking more honestly about the world. This is one story, but not the entire story. But the world is rising in violence, and that's our biggest concern. Should be our biggest concern today.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And one last question, Budina. It's like 1 hour past 10 minutes already. Oh my god. One last question. Indonesia has been the biggest advocate of freedom of the Palestine. Indonesia actually has been a really big advocate on human rights, especially in countries where there's big violation. But the news also broke out that Indonesia vote no in the last United Nations resolution of the principle of the responsibility to protect, or we can call it R2P. I mean, that's raising lots of questions, of course, in the society. Like, what do you think about that, Budina?
I think we need a longer time to discuss about it. That's for sure, because it's one of another complex global issue that not many people are aware of, but it's actually very critical for the future of peace in the world. What I learned is that there are two mechanisms inside of the UN to discuss matters, not just about this particular issue of responsibility to protect, but also on other issues. The way how they work is that there is the issue for there's a substance agenda, and there's the procedural agenda. So the procedural agenda would talk about how a matter will be discussed, how frequent, how to report it, very administrative details on how things will be aired. Whereas substance will discuss the essence of a concept and how it will be implemented, basically. So the side of the Indonesian government has been telling me that basically the substance has been approved by Indonesia. That in essence, Indonesia agreed to having responsibility to protect. So in this, so Indonesia basically agreed to the substance of responsibility to protect, but one item remains hanging, and unfortunately, this is not, according to the Indonesian delegation there, this is not what the vote is going to solve, which is the decision over the parameter of when other countries can jump into other countries, can enter other countries because of the sense of failure in the country's ability to protect their people. So the big question here that Indonesian is asking is, how can you talk about the procedure of other things, whereas the content itself is never concluded? And that's a very, very critical part of the R2P that has not been agreed, which is the parameter of when a country can participate in or jump into other countries' business, basically, the country's authority to protect the people. Indonesia believes that this clarity about the substance is much more essential than when and how it will be discussed. And another issue that they raise also, the issue at the substance level will continue to be in the agenda of the General Assembly no matter what. What Indonesia reject is to add another agenda to the General Assembly agenda, which only we can talk about other things. So Indonesia is concerned that there will be two agendas whose content we may not necessarily know, but it won't necessarily go anywhere to solve that concern of when other countries will be legal, according to international agreement, to jump into other countries' territory for responsibility to protect. So, in terms of our discussion about Israel and Palestine, I guess there's a puzzle that maybe we can then discuss in the next podcast. Basically, Israel is among those who agree to the R2P.
Yeah, I saw that, and that's really interesting. And I was like, what?
So responsibility to protect who, right? Israel.
Yeah.
Aren't you one of the violators of other countries' mandate and authority and sovereignty?
Yeah.
So I guess that's we have to look closer. I think inside of the UN there are some mechanisms that I initially thought as well that this could be a very bad sign, but then I learned that inside of the UN there are several tracks on how to put something on the agenda. So I guess we'll see how things unravel on because I already asked what's next after this voting.
Yeah.
So basically, because the total vote of country who say yes is beyond 50% plus one, the agenda will continue as requested by the sponsor, which is Australia and Ghana. Will continue, and Indonesia would participate. Indonesia promised to be even more critical in making sure that the parameter that's been voiced and demanded would be raised in the next agenda. So not letting the sponsor countries to talk about something else, but not the parameter. That's what MOFA says.
Yeah, that's actually really open up my perspective, Budina. Because at first, of course, I think not only me, but like lots of people think like, what? Why did Indonesia said no, not even abstain? Indonesia vote no, right? And we need to talk more about this in depth. Maybe in the next podcast. Maybe it's it's a spoiler for the next podcast. And it's been a really delightful conversation with you, Budina. I'm so thankful for your time, of course, but we need to talk more about this at the next
Sure, let's
podcast,
continue
of course.
talking in the next one so everybody can get nyambung, right?
Ya, nyambung, udah nyambung. Budina already
Sudah
nyambung,
nyambung?
already connected.
Click and connect.
Okay. We need to end this right now. Okay, thank you for listening to Budina podcast, to Nyambung with Dina Praptara Harja. Take care and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you next
Bye-bye,
episode.
Budina.
Bye-bye.